Good morning, Canes fans. Peter Ariz here, bringing you today's edition of CanesInSight Daily. It's just me for this intro, just for the intro. We have D-Money joining me shortly here, along with the legendary Larry Blustein, an institution, the OG when it comes to the recruiting game in South Florida nationally, really someone who has shed light, given spotlight to a lot of players over the years, countless. You legitimately can't even put a number on it. So really honored to be joined by Larry. So he'll be joining us. It was about a 50-minute interview with him. We talked about the Canes. We talked about this recruiting class. He's had a chance to pretty much see all of these guys live, and then some other general recruiting discussions as well. So he's an institution, another institution down here in South Florida, the law offices of Andrade and Levine accident attorneys. Dial 1-800-747-FREE, 1-800-747-3733 to take back control of your life with Andrade and Levine. So I'm going to play the interview here in just a moment, guys. But again, really good conversation with Larry, who takes pride in the fact that he is not a 247 and on three, and he's not making his evaluations based off of just watching the huddle highlights. He goes to these schools. He mentioned he was at 13 different camps this summer, and he sees all up and down the totem pole in this thing. He'll see the 5 stars. He sees, as I just knocked my water bottle down, he sees the guys who are undervalued in this process. So he has a really good idea of how certain players stack up, and he's opinionated, and he doesn't hold his opinion on a lot of guys, which I really appreciate. He's been doing it for 55 plus years. So yeah, just excited for you guys to hear that interview here that I'm going to start in a second. But first, wanted to tell you that the segment is brought to you by Lomello's Meat Market. New partnership here at CanesInSight, and Lomello's, you can check out lomellos.com. Nationwide shipping available, storefront as well in Miami, about 10 minutes south of campus, 9810 South Dixie Highway. And you're getting the Wagyu, you're getting the Japanese, the Australian, the American Wagyu, but then also have Prime available. So this is still high-end meat. If you don't want to splurge out on the Wagyu, then you still got the option for Prime, and this is still the best that you can get. And we got a discount code, CIS10, for 10% off your order. You see some of these pictures here. You see the tomahawk on the grill. And guys, this is what the 5-star recruits are eating when they come to Miami, right? This is what Mario provides them with, because Mario knows this is the best stuff in the business. So again, lomellos.com, Lomello's Meat Market, best quality. Get it for your tailgates this year, get it for your watch parties at home. You guys know where to go, Lomello's Meat Market. So without much further ado here, remember to hit that like button, subscribe to the channel. Thank you guys for all the support. And D-Money should be doing a show, I believe, this afternoon at 3 o'clock. So stay tuned for that one. We've been giving you guys like double, triple the amount of content as normal because the support has been so awesome. And I'm going to play this interview now with Larry Blustein.
All right. We are here with the legendary 55 years plus doing this stuff, the originator, the godfather, Larry Blustein. How we doing?
Good. Thanks a lot for having us on. I appreciate that. Busy week with the start of the season too, so that's
55 years in. Do you still get the same excitement level?
I do, and it's probably more in the off season than anything else. I just got off probably the busiest off season I've had. I went to 13 colleges. I saw almost 5,000 athletes and like 307 on 7 teams, and went everywhere from West Florida all the way down to FIU and Miami 4 or 5 times. So yeah, that's probably the best thing for me during the summers, because I get a chance to see everybody. During the course of a season, you're kind of limited, and I stay in South Florida because, I don't have to tell you that every week there's great games. So it's and now everybody plays one another, which is, back in the day, Columbus never played St. Thomas. Now they do, or, Northwestern, and everybody plays one another. And that's a good thing, because I think they figured out that nationally you won't get the credibility unless you play this type of schedule. And, I think American Heritage took it to heart a little bit because their schedule is crazy.
Larry, how's the camp schedule kind of changed with the way the recruiting calendar has changed? You mentioned that you just had such a busy summer going to, 13 camps. Is that, you used to see a lot more offers, I would say, like at the Miami camps. You don't see that as much anymore for these incoming class. So can you talk about how that's changed the last few years?
Yeah, that's a good point because, back in the day, everybody used to work out, even the high star rated kids that used to come. But now even at University of Miami, you won't get, you'll get those major type of kids that come to these events, these camps, but they just show up, they don't do, they don't work out, they don't participate. So that's why I like to see the 7-on-7s because everybody likes to play 7-on-7, even the elite kids, although, I think the couple of times that I was down in Miami, I know that Orlando Jones came and Darian Coleman was there, but he didn't play. But that was only because his arm was a little bit sore. But if you look, I don't have to tell you guys, Miami-Dade County kids, Broward County kids, they have that ice water in their veins and they want to compete. They don't go someplace and just sit around. So that's the great thing about, seeing 7-on-7s and the offensive line camps. It's usually just the prospect camps that, Miami or I'm just using Miami for an example, but everybody, when I was at Florida State, they'll have some elite kids like from Georgia or Alabama, and they just come, they just come to, they have the name tag on and they get the royal treatment, but that's the big difference now. Back 15 years ago, everybody used to come and work out and they always wanted to compete, in those camps. But now just the elite kids, they come and that's why I choose maybe not to go to some of those prospect camps, because, you'll read, Gabby Urrutia or somebody will write a thing of all the kids that are going to be there, which is fine, but most of them never work out. So you don't really get a chance to see them.
Yeah, I was with you at one of these recently, and there were a lot of kids on the sideline with backpacks on.
Yeah.
So, by the way, obviously LarryBlustein.com. You want to find him there. Prep Red Zone Florida on X. A lot of content there, including state rankings. And then if you want to listen to him on WQAM and now on 104.3 FM every Monday, 6 to 8. So you're everywhere as usual, especially around this time of year. But I want to ask you, let's start with the Canes because we're on a Canes show before we get into some of the deeper kind of South Florida high school stuff we'd love to talk about. Just looking at this class, lacking South Florida kids, which we'll talk about that in a second. But in terms of Florida guys, I know you cover the whole state for Prep Red Zone. Talking about Ashari Charles from Venice from the commit list, Jordan Campbell, Miami from Northwestern, Samorian Wingo from St. Augustine, Joel Irvin, Fort Myers, Jalen Waters from Armwood. Like I actually talk about all these guys, I'm just going over. Darian Coleman from Orlando, Justin Edwards from Orlando, Javian Mallory from West Boca, Brody Jennings from Jacksonville, Cannon Pickett from Tampa, and then the two offensive linemen, J.J. Sparks, Jacksonville, Reese Woodrow, Orlando. I gave you a ton of names because I just want to see anybody that you've been able to see, and if I miss any national guys you've seen, you can add them as well. But anyone from Miami's class that you've been able to see or get intel on that stands out to you.
Well, I saw all those guys that you mentioned. I've had an opportunity during the spring, went up to Jacksonville Bulls, saw Sparks basically before Mirabal had watched him. And I had come back and I had asked them at one of the camps, maybe the one that I saw you at, and I said, have you seen J.J. Sparks at all? Because I actually went up there to see the kid Naeem Burrows, who's a freak, who played in the Under Armour game last year with Campbell as a junior, which was the first year of that. Seeing him and Reese Woodrow, and I saw Reese was at one of our Prep Red Zone camps. Great kid, great family, big, probably as strong as you're ever going to get. I mean, this kid is like, and he's so well respected. I know Coach Johnson up at Boone, and everybody loves him. And, I know that his parents have a restaurant there that a lot of people go to, a hamburger place. And, seeing him and, Jordan Campbell, I've known since Jordan was like 13 or 14. Great kid. It's funny because they've been, advertising him as a linebacker, but he doesn't play the linebacker position. He actually plays like a kind of hybrid edge position, sort of like back in the day, the Corey Moore who played at Virginia Tech, that type of player, but like I said, the one thing and the common denominator of the kids that they have, and they're all really good guys. I mean, they're I had it like last year with Campbell and Wilkerson, and had an opportunity to see them. And but all the guys that you've mentioned, the upstate kids, Darian Coleman, he's fun kid to watch. You're very competitive. And in fact, he had a big game the other night in their game, win over Sanford Seminole, to kind of kick off the season. And I think that for Miami fans, you'll get a chance to see him. He'll be most likely Jones will be right back in the state championship game. They're really, really good. But, you take a look at the kid Jennings, and, and God rest his father's soul. I watched him when he played at Carroll City, and his brother, and great family, great bloodlines. And I really wasn't surprised that he, flipped from Michigan, because he just, he's a Florida guy, and sometimes people don't understand. There's a certain, something special about being from Florida and being able to play in the state. And I think when you look at guys like that, they have a tendency to have a lot of pride. And certainly, basically everybody that you mentioned, all the way, and like the kid Artavius Jones from last year from Bluntstown. I had a chance to see him as an 8th grader. Because Bluntstown has that, I think K through 12 thing, and he played in the state championship game. And Coach Bo Johnson, who was a coach at the time, he come over to me. He says, "See that kid right there?" He says, "He's going to be really special. I mean, really." And he says he's got like a 4.0 GPA, which is, when coaches start throwing out grade point averages, you kind of said, okay, it's sort of like when Brevin Jordan was with Miami. A friend, I went to school at the University of Nevada, Las Vegas. So I had a couple of people that I know out there, and one of them was a line coach at Bishop Gorman. And he goes, "Oh yeah, Brevin's really, really nice. But we got this kid who's an 8th grader, who I'm telling you, he may be the best player that we've ever had. And he's going to be starting at tight end for Miami this year." And, that's how, you look at the advantage that I have is that I'm not a computer recruiter. I go to places and I'll see these kids, and I say it, the rivals and on threes, they're going to see the elite kids, no doubt, but they're not going to be able to find an under the radar type of kid, because they don't go to those type of places. And, there's been quite a few places or players that Miami's had, guys, over the last couple of years that really weren't, Joel Irvin, here's a perfect example. The first time I saw him, I wasn't impressed. He was knock needy and he was lazy. And then all of a sudden, 2 years later, I'm looking at him. I says, "Who is that kid?" He goes, "That's the same guy you saw from a couple of years ago." And so that's the thing. The great thing is, anybody knows with these 5-star guys. I mean, the kid Derek Cooper, perfect example. No star 12 months ago, 13 months ago. Now he's a 5-star. Because of the fact that when he was at Cardinal Gibbons, really didn't play a lot, play behind, a senior, so he didn't get an opportunity. But I knew Derek was going to be special from when I saw, occasionally I'll go to a youth game where a parent or a coach will say, "Hey, Larry, there's this kid I want you to check out. He's going to be in high school next year." And Derek was one of those guys. But that's the thing, you look at Miami's roster, and I know that you had mentioned that, Miami doesn't have all these kids from local. And you know what? Even when they were running the table and national champions, there were still guys getting away. Steve Hutchinson, Hall of Famer, getting away. Isaac Bruce, Hall of Famer, getting away. Derek Thomas, Hall of Famer, getting away. So, Miami has such an abundance of talent. And if you could, parlay the experience that Mario had when he was out west, knowing that type of region of the country and having ties with the fact that they have some people, that do well in the South and in the East, they still get their guys. They still got Wesley Bassane. They still have Ray. They still have a lot of these kids, Malachi Tony. They have all these young kids. So you can't get everybody, but I would take a lot of these out of the state kids, you look at the influx of what they got in, in the secondary this year. Most of those guys, I remember watching a couple of those kids when they were in high school and they were recruited before. Like the kid that came from Michigan State, played at Venice. He wasn't a teammate. Right. He wasn't a teammate of Ashari Charles, but he knew him, from when he was older and Ashari was hanging around, at Venice. So, they go away. I remember the kid Poyser when he came out of high school. The kid was a stud then, but you know what? Sometimes you get lost in the shuffle, and I mean, that's what I'm saying. I know it's important to get local kids, but if you look on Miami's roster, they've got plenty of local kids.
Yeah, they're doing pretty good there. And it's funny. I'm thinking back to maybe 27 years ago, just to give people an idea of how far back you go on this stuff and how on top of it you are. I remember you wrote a report, either it was in the Herald or it was in CaneSport. It was somewhere. It was a blurb on Andre Johnson coming out of Miami High, and you said Michael Irvin with quicker feet. And people make fun of me for some of my comparisons being too lofty, but that was a pretty lofty comparison. And I would say 27 years later, that was pretty accurate. On the player.
And it's funny because he was at the actual first Nike camp that they had. They held it on Miami's campus. It was on the intramural fields. And they had him and Vernon Carey was at that event. They had Louis Gatchelon, if you remember Lou. Big Lou was a big, strong kid out of Jackson. Yeah, and that's the thing. You get a chance to see these kids. And a lot of people try to make assessments, and Peter knows this. I mean, you try to make assessments off of film, and you're not going to be 100% accurate, because if it was that easy, everybody would do it. You have to look into their character. You have to see what, like Teddy Bridgewater is a perfect example. When he was a junior in high school, he would go out, play his position, and come back to the bench and just hang out by himself. And I'm thinking, wow, if the average coach saw that, they wouldn't really recruit him, because he's not with his receivers. He's not. And, the bell went off, and then he started to do some of that stuff. So, yeah, it's really good to see these kids live and in person. It's nice, because the one thing that always gets me is when you have all these people making assessments on these players. And Pete, this, they're in Oregon or Washington, and they're making assessments on kids from Christopher Columbus that you're watching from 5 feet away. And you're thinking, wow. That boggles my mind more than anything, when somebody's going to read an assessment on a player that you just were talking to on the bench, and this guy's, he's got no character, and he's got this, and he's slow. And I'm thinking, wow, that's a lot to know from never seeing the kid play.
Yeah, there's how much money there is in this business now, right?
Yeah, I know.
But it's unfortunate, there are the negative effects to it, right? Which is some of this stuff that you're talking about here.
Yeah, no doubt.
So, Larry, we went through that whole list, and I want to ask some broader questions, but just specifically, is there any one player that just from that list of Miami commits that you've seen, you've been around, you talked to, and you're just like, you know what, I feel good betting on this guy. This is one guy, that I feel I know pretty much what we have here mentally, physically, and I feel strong about this particular player.
Yeah, that's a great question, because of the fact that I think a lot of those kids in their own right are going to be special and going to have an opportunity, especially in this day and age where you have a Malachi Tony who shouldn't even graduate until this coming year from high school, and he's already dazzling everybody at, playing with guys that are 5 years older than he is, and have all that experience. Just out of that class, I just think the world of Campbell, because of the fact that he's gotten it done. And when I say this, you take a look at that Under Armour game last year where they let juniors play for the first time, and he had 9 tackles. And he was only a sophomore, going to be a junior, or a junior going to be a senior in high school. And I think that fact that he's ready physically and mentally, he's one of those guys that I can't wait. We know that linemen take a while. It's not going to be real easy, but because Miami's been fortunate to kind of like concentrate on that offensive line since Mario and Mirabal have come. They've gotten to the point where now it's a pecking order. Before, if you guys remember, Alex Dono and I were talking about this like 5-6 years ago. That offensive line was so bad that they were getting, in the Pittsburgh game we were watching, they were getting pushed back into the running backs. And the running backs were 5-6 yards deep. And they were getting, and now that's not the case. And now you have all these offensive linemen that are younger that are ready to take their place. The guys that I mentioned from last year, the Wilkersons, the Campbells, guys like that, Buchanan, who I had an opportunity to watch play, versatile type guys. That's what you have too. And some of the players that are coming up now, these players are more versatile. And they're given more of an opportunity. If you remember when Tracy Howard and Duke Johnson got here, there's no way they should have been starting as freshmen. That's not how it is, on championship type of teams. Now, they all did very well, but the whole thing was, if you remember, that was a time where Miami was limited on scholarships, them and USC at the same time. And what USC did is they went after 3 5-star linemen and went after 2-star running backs. Miami went after like 2 and 3-star linemen and 5-star running back like Duke Johnson. And, it worked out for him as far as being the all-time leading rusher. But during his time, Miami really never did anything as a team, that was, nationally, that was nationally rated. So, yeah, there's a lot in this recruiting business, and people don't realize, and I know you guys do because you're around it, but there's a lot of people, a lot of fans that don't understand this whole recruiting, and nobody understands it better than Mario Cristobal, one of the best recruiters in the country. I mean, it's played out every year. Obviously he still has some proving as a game day coach, and everybody knows that. And hopefully this year it'll all come to fruition for him. But as a recruiter, he knows what to look for. He just has a feel for it. And it's not easy. As I said, the toughest position to recruit is line, because the maturity of the player, the size, the strength. I mean, you could tell if the kid has good feet or if he has an understanding, but is he going to be able to mature? And look at today. I mean, I think Bell is the perfect example. 2 years ago, I watched him, and he was like falling all over himself. He wasn't a very agile player. He was technically deficient. He'll play in the NFL, not because he's 6'10 or 6'9, but because he's technically sound. And that's the difference when you have coaching. And credit to Miami. They saw the defense last year fall apart. They saw that those kids weren't getting coached up, so they made a change everywhere but with Jason Taylor. And rightfully so. You bring in Heatherman, who is from the Greg Schiano tree, who's that type of guy, because P.J. Fleck also, who he worked with over at Minnesota, was another Greg Schiano tree. Hence, Mario Cristobal worked with Greg Schiano for a number of years. So when you go after players like that or people like that, you understand what he's had to kind of feel his way in since he's been here. But the one thing he told me when we sat down, like 2 months after he got the job, he asked me one question. He goes, from afar, I saw Miami get all these kids, these players that were pretty good. He goes, what do you think the problem is? I said, well, the coaches here never coached them up. And he said to me, that won't be a problem here with us. And when I heard him say that, and also when he told me what kind of coaches, do you see coaches out there that you think would be a good fit at this program? And I go, there's a lot of guys that I said, you have to be comfortable with them. And he says, I will make changes every year until we get it right. So those people who doubt what he, when he came in and said all these things, everyone goes, oh, he'll never live up. But he has. He's done everything he said he was going to do as far as, getting this team, on track. And I think that this year you're going to see a little bit more of it. And then over the next couple of years is a team that's going to be in that mode where you just, like in Alabama, where, you see Alabama or Georgia. Here's a perfect example. Georgia had in 2 years, 25 people drafted plus the Water Girls. And they find some way to replace them. And the same with Alabama. He goes, oh, well, they can afford to lose a kid like Cohen, who is a big-time lineman, but yet they have 2 or 3 of those type of guys right after, and that's what Miami's striving for. And I think that's one of the reasons why, if you're a Miami fan, you got to be optimistic because you're in the right hands. And, I think when I go to these camps, I look at different things that maybe other people don't. And I watch Mario and go through, the line drills with his current team, during spring. And he's not the type of guy who'll pat you on the ass and say, don't worry, you'll get it again. He'll say, get the F back over there and do it now. And to me, that's a big difference. That's a big difference. Being accountable.
Larry, I wanted to ask you, it's a more of a general question, but you mentioned the reclassifications. I feel like for so long, the transfers down here was the biggest topic of discussion. The reclassifications, I think there's some kids like Malachi Tony and Armando Blunt that are mentally ready for that, right? But I feel, me personally, like there are sometimes guys who maybe they make the leap. Obviously, there's NIL opportunities at the end of it. But is there kind of a rule of thumb when you look at some of these reclassifications where you say, man, I hope this guy's making the right decision in terms of, it's great that you get the money now, but at the same time, your development is still going to be your development.
Yeah, good point. There's a couple of kids, obviously, all in every cycle that you kind of question yourself, and those are the type of guys that end up, in the portal again, because they do it for the wrong reasons. All of a sudden, and to me, another facet of it is the homeschooling. I still can't, grasp these kids going, getting educated by themselves at home. You look at James Franklin, and I were talking from Penn State. He won't recruit a kid that's homeschooled because they're socially awkward when they get to school. You think about this. They're home on the computer doing their work up until like 11:30, 12. Then they jump on Instagram or whatever, social media. And then by 1:30, 2 o'clock, they go to practice. So what kind of interaction have they had? To us and you guys, the best thing about high school was change of classes, senior friends, lunchtime, having a chance to, interact with people. And that to me has made these athletes a little introverted and because they're not getting that social, and people don't think it's a big deal, but I do. I think it's a huge deal. There are some, that are equipped for that. There are some, but there are a lot of kids that have no reason being home and trying to govern themselves when it comes to learning.
Let me ask you, Larry, this is a big picture question. I think we talked about it briefly last time I saw you, but my sense of this, and it's not just because there's not that many in Miami's class, but just the last few years, it feels to me like South Florida is down from where it was, let's say 2018, 2019, that kind of era. And before that, what you get a Derek Cooper, obviously Jeremiah Smith, they're still top line guys, but at least my sense being around camps where you have all those guys kind of huddled together is that it doesn't look quite as deep as it's been in the past. And we're starting to see NFL draft numbers drop a little bit. Do you see that? And if you do see that, what are some of the reasons you think that's happening?
Yeah, I do. I mean, for like you mentioned, Derek Cooper, and you have Diabell, who, jury's still out. Obviously he's one of the top quarterbacks, but he's still got to go into the SEC and prove at a place like Texas, which is not going to be the easy place. Justice Fitzpatrick, who, obviously, I thought he was going to go to Alabama. He's currently at Georgia, but that may change. He's a big time kid, I think, as far as local kids. But you're right. I mean, most of your guys, especially in the 26 class, are from outside the area. Obviously Jay Kroll, who started out at Bishop Moore and then went to IMG and just recently committed to Oklahoma. Guys like him, guys like Trenton Henderson from Pensacola Pine Forest, a big lineman like that. And a lot of these kids, remember, that go to IMG aren't from here. So, other than Kroll, who is, but, I went up and looked at the kid Naeem Burrows from Jacksonville Bulls, stud type of kid. You look at Calvin Russell, he's nice. Is he an elite kid? We'll see. I mean, there's a long time, before he gets to Syracuse. I mean, he's fortunate that he's on a team, with a kid like, Nick Lanier, who I think is the best. I think he's the best 2027 receiver in the country. He's a beast. I mean, he does everything well. And, guys like that, and, you James Johnson, who came in, and is going to go to Texas, playing at Northwestern. He's originally from North Fort Myers. You have guys like that, I mean, but you're right. I mean, as far as local, it's not as much as it used to be. And don't ask me why. I mean, like I said, Jordan Campbell's one of those guys that we all like a lot. I mean, you look at Javion Mallory, a South Florida kid, a Pompano Beach area kid who's going to West Boca Raton. Saw him the other night. Real nice kid. I mean, he's a really, really good football talent. I mean, another guy, and even Ashari Charles. I mean, I watched him as a 9th grader, and the kid's grown into a man. But from the South Florida area, 100% right. It's not is talented. I think that's going to change in the next couple of classes, though. With the Neiman Lawrences and with players of that caliber who are big time. But this 2026 class, kind of lacks that. I like Jason Lopez, good football player. Is he a superstar? Probably not. I laughed when I saw him in all the pictures of recruiting in basketball uniforms. There's just no way. You can't play in the ACC in basketball and play a half a year. You just can't. It's just not feasible. But guys like that, I mean, you certainly have kids, but most of the talent this year is Central Florida up north, and then IMG kids every year. I think that the Darius Hughes kid was kind of overlooked. I still don't think his recruitment's over. He's going to have a pretty big year. The Darrell Bell kid from Goldman, who I think is a real good one, was Florida State's first commitment. But I agree with you. I think on the overall, I don't think it's as potent in this class, but I think you're going to see in 27 and 28 that'll change.
Florida's been, as a state, and South Florida in particular, has been, I think, better with quarterbacks than people realize when you really go back and look at it. At least, on the high end with the Geno Smiths, the Teddy Bridgewaters, Tyler Huntley, obviously Lamar Jackson, Jacoby Brissett, guys that go and start in the NFL, start games. Darion Coleman from Central Florida, you've had a chance to see him. Polarizing player because of the fact that he's not the biggest guy in the world, just a different kind of quarterback in terms of the profile. What have you seen from him, and you think he could have success at the ACC level?
Yeah, no doubt. He's a winner. He realizes that he needs to get out of the pocket. He can, and he's worked real well. Balin Trujillo's worked with him a lot. He's done a tremendous job. And I remember when he was down here 2 years ago, and they were kind of looking at him and Michael Clayton because they wanted to try to get a 2026 quarterback at the time. And I remember it was at Miami. It was like a competition type of thing that day. And after the practice, I went over and talked to a couple of coaches that watched him, and they go, hey, you know what? This kid's our offense. This is the offense that we run. We need he'll stay in the pocket, but we want him to break containment a lot. And he's the type of kid. He's got great vision. He's smart, picks up things. And I think that, I think he is really, really a special type of quarterback. But you know what? The way Miami is, they're still going to bring more in. They're going to go into the portal. And, I kind of thought that was a curse, but you have to do that in this day and age, and it's not because everyone goes, well, if you keep bringing in Carson Becks and Ward type of guys every year, you're going to lose your recruits. You won't lose them. They're always going to be competitive because where are they going to go? They're going to go somewhere else that they're doing the same thing. So, I think that Darion Coleman is the type of guy that's going to come in and he's going to compete next year, to be one of the future guys, on this team.
It's funny you bring that up, Larry, because that's actually one of the biggest comments we get on our show from people when we talk about it. And we both, Danny and I, kind of agree with that. you have an opportunity to bring in someone who's a proven quarterback. And again, the way these NIL structures are with the quarterback position, you're going to have to pay a lot of money for a highly rated guy out of high school that at the end of the day, you don't know what it is.
Yeah.
But you still, I think, need to bring in some guys from the high school ranks and hope you hit on one of them or develop while at the same time knowing what you get hopefully out of the portal. And look, if they hit on Beck again this year, they'll probably have the pick of the litter.
Yeah, and 100%. And, you know, like I said, you have a generational guy last year. I mean, let's face it. I mean, he was the best one-year quarterback Miami's ever had. And I've been watching these guys since like 1960 when George Meyer was here. And, you know, obviously Miami's offense last year was as good as they've ever had. And when you could come and raise the bar. And my only question is, you know, when we had Mary on our show during the spring, was I was a little skeptical because sometimes, if you remember last year when Ward came in, I mean, from day one, he was there. He played in the spring game, threw for 450 yards, 4 touchdowns, but not having Beck actually in the mix, I kind of worried me. But you know what? There's a lot of people say he's got experience and this and that. And, you know, I mean, to me, the last time he was, you know, kind of relevant, you had Bowers at tight end and Ladd McConkey at wide receiver, and they ain't walking through the door here. So, but I think he's the type of guy from a mental and a maturity standpoint, especially with Miami's offensive line and the weapons that they have in the backfield. I think that he gets eased in. Now, that may not be the case every time you bring in a quarterback like that, but I think that Carson Beck, and I agree with you, it's going to be something that it's going to be every year. Someone's going to want to come in. If Miami wins the ACC and gets into the playoffs this year, next man up. There's a sophomore or junior somewhere in the country that's just waiting to come here next year and battle nickel and battle Darian Coleman for the job.
So just being around and this is not to be limited to Miami recruits, but just guys that you've seen, is there a player that you feel is underrated from what you've seen and then seeing just how he's being rated by the rivals and the 247s of the world that you've seen personally for this cycle? Again, doesn't have to be a Miami recruit, but just somebody you've seen, you're like, all right, this guy, you know, I think this guy's going to be a really, really good player and people need to wake up. Yeah,
well, I mean, there's a lot of guys getting ranked, but I happen to think that the kid Will Griffin, the quarterback that's going to Florida, I mean, he's getting play, but he's not getting DJ Lagway type play. And to me, we had our prediction show last night, and we were talking about the Florida game, and I go, well, you don't have to worry because DJ won't be playing by the time they play Miami because he's going to be hurt. And somebody like Will Griffin, who's 6'4", 235, 240, I watched him since he was in the 8th grade, and I think he's head and shoulders above Noah Grubbs, and Noah got all that publicity early on, you know, because he was going to Notre Dame, and I think he's definitely one of the guys, and certainly, you know, maybe that a lot of people don't understand, but I think the Irvin kid that's coming to Miami, because, you know, he's 6'6", he's a beast, and you know what? There's sometimes where you got to say to yourself, you know, I was wrong. And I was wrong early on evaluating him, but I wasn't the only one. You know, Kelvin Harris, a former Hurricane, who was, you know, a big Fort Myers guy, you know, he had told me early on, I says, I'm not really sold on him. And he goes, well, let's see what happens in a year or so. And sometimes the bell goes off, these kids. But I think those two guys definitely you know, the Brandon Bennett kid from American Heritage, only because he runs a 4.29 and, you know, he could get out there pretty. So I think those guys would be like in the line of kids that I think that are, you know, under the radar. I think the Karan Maycock kid going to Florida State from Miami Central, because he's matured and he's got up to 6'2", you know, and even Wesley Saint was telling me, you know, as a linebacker, I mean, he could bring it. Yeah, so there's quite a few kids that are under the radar, and you know, Larry Miles who's actually Darian Coleman's receiver, you know, going to Nebraska. Here's another guy. He was rated in the 80s by a lot of people, in the state. And I think that he's kind of shown. Justin Edwards, somebody Miami got, a linebacker from Edgewater, who I watched last year. I wasn't overly impressed because I thought he was kind of a safety type, but now he's going to be over 215, 220 by the time he lands in Coral Gables, and he's 6'2.5", and the kid can run. And, those type of guys.
Larry, we've heard a lot about this offensive line class in the state of Florida being the best that at least some of the people on the recruiting staff have ever seen. You look at Miami's part of it. Remove the IMG kids. You got Joel Irvin from Fort Myers. You mentioned seeing Sparks and Woodrow in person, Jacksonville, Orlando, respectively.
Right.
Cannon Pickett from Tampa. I think that's the 4 we got from in-state. Other guys went to Clemson, schools like that. Is this the best group of offensive linemen you've seen in state since you've been following this stuff?
Yeah, but last year wasn't so bad because, like I said, Miami landed those 3, with Wilkerson and Campbell and also Buchanan, who, you look at Buchanan and there's a guy who plays either guard position and center, sort of like a Rodriguez that they have now, a versatile type of guy. I think that the line class statewide is really good, but you also have to remember that it's kind of spiked almost every year because of the fact that, you have a guy like Mauanoa who didn't play in Florida, but he played at IMG. So you get a lot of these IMG kids who are ranked very, very high, but they didn't come from here. But as far as an overall class, we do, like the kid College and guys like that, we do rank them because they're in the state of Florida playing, and they do play a Florida schedule, like IMG played, they'll play Venice and, play a couple of other schools, and they played the First Academy last week. And then the First Academy, also has Barclay, who's, I think the one kid, if, somebody asked me the other day, the one kid that Miami didn't get in this class that you probably would have liked to seen is Grant Wise, because I covered his dad when his dad was at Pensacola, Washington, and I watched him in his whole career here at Miami. Probably for his size, probably one of the best offensive linemen, and everybody will tell you that Miami had. Versatile, could play guard, played center. He was a Don Solinger recruit. But his son, since he was in 7th grade, was a beast. And I kept thinking, and I even told Coach Mirabal at the time, I said, there's, I don't know if Ty Wise's son is coming. He didn't know at the time because he was only like in 8th grade. And I said, this kid technically is just a freak. He's going to play center, but he could play tackle. Next year when he goes to Clemson, this is a kid that really, I think, got away. Miami tried, and I'm not going to take any shots at anybody, but they tried. They gave it the shot. I think Ty really kind of stepped aside and let the kid make his own decision, which, a lot of parents do. Just because you went to Miami doesn't mean everybody should. Maurice Crumb's kid went to Notre Dame, and, you had other guys that played at Miami that their players, that their sons didn't go. But I think, and I've said this from day one, that was the one guy, and I even said that to Coach Cristobal, and he goes, no, I hear you loud and clear, because the kid, he's the total package. Not only is he technically sound, but he's 6'5". He's a 4.4 student, so if anybody got away from this class, that would be the one guy that I would just say, hey, I wish he would have been in that class. But he's part of what you're talking about, him and the big kid from Vero Beach, Micah Smith, and those are all the offensive linemen that you guys are talking about in this class in this state. And it's getting deeper, because look back 10 years ago and you look at maybe the first 40 players that we ranked, one maybe it was an offensive lineman. Not like that anymore, but listen, that's the times have changed.
Larry, you've been super generous with your time. We really appreciate it. LarryBlustein.com, Prep Red Zone, Florida, WQAM, now 104.3 FM, 6 to 8 every Monday. Legendary Larry Blustein. Before we let you go, last question from me. You did your top 20 on LarryBlustein.com, Dade Broward. seems like there's just those big 5 schools right now with Northwestern back, where you have Northwestern and Central, the public schools, the Broward private schools, Chaminade, St. Thomas Aquinas, American Heritage. Those were your top 5 there on that list. Who do you think emerges as when we finish the season, you say this was the best team of that 5? And secondly, does any other school have an ability to break into that top 5 in South Florida?
Okay, first part, Northwestern. I don't think anybody's 14 points with, and that's including Chaminade and St. Thomas. Wow. They're just, and I saw this in the spring, when Teddy was there, and I just saw how much depth that they had. And, we went to watch their scrimmage, and a friend of mine said, wow, their offense is really good. And then all of a sudden I said, but who the hell's going to score on them? And then you saw the other night against Lakeland couldn't score. You can't, they're just so fast. And when you have a front 7 that good, and then you have a backside and a secondary, and they're deep, and they could put in kids. They've just assembled some really good talent. But my dark horse out of all, like you said, Miami Southridge. I think that they're kind of like hurting a little bit that they missed out last year. You got kind of screwed by West Boca, in that game that could have sent them to state, and they could have beaten Osceola. I think that Coach Sonatas has done a tremendous job. He's kind of tapping into, what used to be, that South Miami Heights area, that Perrine area, that they're starting to keep those kids home that would normally go other places. And Peter, you're familiar. A lot of those kids went to Columbus that lived in that area for years. Yeah. Not that Coach Dunn's not getting them type of kids now. He's just not getting them as much as he used to. But that's, kudos to somebody like, to him. And I think that I think Southridge would be my dark horse to, out of all the other teams that we didn't mention, that were in the, as you said, in the top 5 teams. Miami Norland is a good team. I think they lost a lot by losing the front, those the twins who were at FSU, the Desir brothers, and, losing somebody like Ennio Yapor, whether he was a college prospect or not, he threw for 14,000 yards. that's a lot to lose. But to answer your question, I think Northwestern's the elite team. And the only reason why I put them 3rd is because they're not going to lose. And the chances that St. Thomas and Chaminade could lose this weekend. Last night I had the Coach Lara on from Matter Day, and you're sitting there looking at a team that won 119 games and lost 9 in the last 10 years. And then you're looking at a team like St. Francis Academy, who has the largest offensive line in the history of high school football. They average over 320. And they're coming to play Chaminade. Then you have St. Joe's out of Pennsylvania, who was here 2 years ago, loaded with talent. They got a kid that's starting at Penn State at linebacker, and a kid it's had 2 kids at Rutgers. And you look at some of these teams that are going to go up against, St. Thomas is 6-time defending state champion, but there's got to be a time where you say, you know what? And listen, they played Bishop Gorman great last year. I never even thought they had a shot, only because you got to remember that Bishop Gorman is the only team in that state. They're 23-time state champions. There's nobody else in Vegas that comes close. The only one was Liberty, and they're, not real good. But that's what I'm saying. But down here, now with the emergence of a Chaminade and with Heritage and St. Thomas isn't the only, they're not the only rodeo in town anymore. And then, these kids have options. And you look at the public schools, winning a state title last year with West Boca Raton. I mean, who ever known? If you ever been out that way, I mean, once you cross 441, there's not a house under 1.5. So you're thinking, how the heck are they doing well in football? But hey, listen, you get that little fire going. But I think that, the public schools, the inner city schools here are probably at such an advantage, guys, because of the fact they're under enrolled. So that means every year they could bring in anybody, especially with this open enrollment. They could bring in anybody. It's like an endless loop. And they don't have that. You look at Houston, you look at Dallas, you look at LA, you look at Atlanta, you look at New Orleans, and all their really good teams are private or suburb schools. That's not the case here. your better schools, obviously private, but your inner city schools. I mean, you look from